Hey, I wanted to show you something really amazing. This was when I first studied the Bible many years ago when I first got saved. I was listening to a lot of Chuck Missler. This was when we got Chuck Missler on cassette tapes. Now, he had Galatianaire. I didn't know what Galatianaire was at the time. And I don't think he would have known either. But he ended up teaching the outer darkness thing. So I can no longer recommend his teachings because that's a stumbling block for the conscience. Now, I don't know if he would have doubled down on it if he would have been confronted. It's the people who double down and persist in teaching Galatianaire while denying they're doing it. These are the deceiving wolves. I don't know. I'm not going to make a judgment on Chuck Missler. He had a few shady things, though. For example, the one thing that really disillusioned me, besides the outer darkness teaching, which he didn't teach that till I got out of the Chinese cult. I went into a Chinese cult for 10 years and came out and found out that he was teaching the same thing they were. I was so disillusioned with him. I hadn't heard him in 10 years. But he stood for the Textus Receptus as the superior inspired manuscript, okay, but was on the board of the ISV. And the ISV was based on the Alexandrian manuscripts, which he condemned. So I could never get my head around that. And there's a lot of people talking about King James on my channel, and King James only. And they're coming on and telling me about the math. But one thing was Chuck Missler introduced me to the math and the genealogy in the Greek in the Matthew genealogy of Jesus. And just to break down all the rules real quick, I just did a quick summary in bullets of the points. But the rules of the genealogy in Matthew are that the number of words is divisible by 7, the number of letters are divisible by 7, the number of vowels and consonants are divisible by 7, the number of words that begin with a vowel and consonant are divisible by 7, the number of words that occur more than once in more than one form and in only one form, so that's 3 different things, are divisible by 7. The number of nouns and 7, the number of nouns is the number of 7, and there's only 7 other kinds or forms of nouns permitted in the genealogy, and that has to be divisible by 7. And then the number of male names is divisible by 7. Okay? And this math is amazing. This is the Greek genealogy of Jesus Christ. Now think about that. That is people naming their children over centuries, right? That they don't know that God's constructing this genealogy. That is God's absolute sovereignty in history. That's what it's proving. But what's even more amazing is that these were Hebrew names. And these properties show up in the Greek. Okay? And the Hebrew names, if you transliterate them, spell out sentences. And you guys probably all know this, but from Adam to Noah spells out Adam is man. Man was appointed, that's Seth. Mortal, that's Kenan. Enosh. Then sorrow is, I think, Kenan. But the blessed God, Mahalel, shall descend, Jared, teaching Enoch that his death shall bring Methuselah, the lamentable Lamech, hope, Noah. So it spells out a sentence that gives us the gospel. That's in the Hebrew. And yet, when the names themselves are translated into Greek, they have all these mathematical properties as well. This shows, number one, yes, it does show that the Bible is incredible, right? But it shows the absolute sovereignty of God in human history and his ability to weave on multiple levels a thick bandwidth of communication beyond anything we could have ever devised with any computer. It's beyond anything that any human could come up with, you know. And this is one of the things that shows the integrated nature of the message system we've received, proving that it was created from outside the time domain. That's how Chuck Missler always talked about it. 66 books written over thousands of years, yet more than by 40 authors in 3 languages, and yet it is an integrated message system in which every detail shows that it's been supernaturally designed from beyond the time domain. Love that stuff. Now, here's something for you. I mentioned this math to a King James only guy, and he said the King James has even more math. And somebody just got on my channel today and said, and this has 7, and this has 7, and that's in the King James, and that proves the King James is inspired. Okay, so the math is what they're saying proves that the translation is inspired. Now, I will say that the math does prove, in some sense, that the word is designed supernaturally from an intelligence beyond what we have, for sure. But that's not what God told us to look to. He told us to look to the prophetic word, which was signed in blood. But anyway, he doesn't point to math and say, look at the math. He says, you have a more sure word of prophecy. And what he says is, who's like me, telling the end from the beginning and from ancient time things yet not yet done. Speaking of the testimony of Jesus Christ and the fulfillment of prophecy, that God's counsel is surely going to come to pass. Okay? So the King James people are on my wall telling me that the math proves the King James is more inspired than the Greek manuscript it's based on. And they're using all this math. And if I mention the math in the Greek, they say, well, it has more. I mean, that's just stupid. But if the math is the proof, okay, here's the problem. Chuck Missler had a whole thing on this, and it wasn't just the genealogy. It was all the letters of Mark, the different Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, all had these kind of properties where the number of unique words in one Gospel that were not in the other Gospels was a multiple of 7 or whatever. All that stuff keeps going. And he said that this came from Ivan Panin, who was a Russian mathematician who did all this math. And he had years and years, spent thousands of hours, writing thousands of pages of these kind of discoveries. Well, I would have always assumed that it was the Textus Receptus that he based this on, until I was telling somebody this about 10 years ago, an unbeliever who was very well educated, and I was telling him about the math and trying to use it to prove the Bible. And he said, well, what manuscript is it based on? So I went back and researched it. And you know what I discovered? It was the Westcott Hort, which is the manuscript. The Panin based his math on the manuscript that is the origin of the NIV, the NASB, and all the translations that have major errors and corruptions in them. Well, what does that tell you? Because the King James only people will tell you that all those translations are corrupt. Now, I will too. Does that tell you that the math is what proves that they are inspired instead? See, that's the thing. The argument they're using for the King James is used to support the authenticity of the Westcott Hort manuscripts, the Alexandrian manuscripts, that the corrupt translations that they all insist are not God's word, prove that those are the word. You can see the math there. And trust me, the King James does not have more math than what Ivan Panin found. Okay, I'm not saying that it doesn't have math, but these translations have math as a side effect of God's signature in putting his word together, and it proves that he's preserved it no matter what men have tried to do. But again, the math is not what we are told to look to decide whether something is a superior translation. And I've got people on my wall telling me that the King James is an improvement over the original text. And the reason they tell me this is so is because of the math. So then that means the Westcott Hort is an improvement, because it's got the math too. Now here's the thing. Do you know who really likes math? Kabbalists, mystics, occultists, and Satanists. They prove things out with math. Now, I'm not saying, that's why Lucifer, being the great architect of the universe and the Masonic religion, it's all about the math. That doesn't mean that God's not the author of the math, but God does not point us to math. Math, when you use it in this way, can be an interesting artifact, or it can be part of a satanic ploy to blind you from seeing the truth in the Word. And the people who've come to me with King James only and told me to look at the math have usually done so to argue a perverse doctrinal point that's contrary to the doctrine of Christ, and try to shut my mouth from speaking about what the Greek word actually means. I remember one said, I was using Hebrews to say, look, the abusive concept of authority still was in the minds of the people who were translating the King James. And they used obey your leaders, obey those who have the rule over you, rather than be persuaded by, which is what the Greek word really suggests. And this guy got on my wall and told me, no, the King James says obey, and I don't care if you got your feelings hurt, that's what it says. And he was perfectly willing to uphold an abusive authority structure just because the King James says it. And who are you to look at the Greek? And when I called him on it, he started pointing me to math. Now, the King James only people are fascinated and bewitched by all these wives' tales and different things that some are observable and some are not. But if you come arguing King James only on my wall, I'll block you. And it's because you are here to shut down reason. And you are not speaking the doctrine of Christ. You're not necessarily for the doctrine of Christ. You're for your fascinating math and mysticism. That's what you're interested in. And you just want to argue and prove you're right about something. But the math argument needs to just stop. It's embarrassing. I was embarrassed when I found out that all of Panin's math was built on the Westcott Hort, because I know that the NIV and those translations have massive corruptions in them due to the underlying text. But that didn't stop God from preserving his word. It's still there. So it is true. I have found that most of the time when people are struggling to understand the Bible and dealing with condemnation, you have to diffuse the interpretation that they're using. And usually it's because they're not using a King James. But there's places in the King James you've got to correct that too. For example, and I'm not going to get into it, the difference between testament and covenant, same Greek word. but context governs its meaning, and there's a couple places where the King James renders it covenant when it should be testament, and testament when it should be covenant. And it puts people in legalistic bondage. And you may not even realize that there's legalistic bondage associated with thinking you have a part in a covenant, that you are somehow a party to a covenant. But you're not. You're a testament heir. Same Greek word, but the English translators had to make a choice. And they were limited to their theological knowledge. And they didn't know the difference between Israel and the church at that time. So to say that the King James is doubly inspired, even more than the manuscript it's based on, is stupid superstition. And you know, a few years ago, it was the superstitious King James only people who were insisting it's more inspired than any other version of the Bible ever, that were the ones falling for the Mandela effect and saying that the devil had changed the Bible. And we're using the wolf, the lion and the lamb versus the wolf and the lamb. It's actually wolf and the lamb. But we've heard it from Catholic songs so much that in our head, it's lion and the lamb, So then, when they show you the real text, the King James people go, they changed the Bible. And what I found with the King James people is they know all this math and all this lore about the King James, but they haven't read it. They don't know what it says. Now, don't be offended if you're one of these people that loves the King James. I only read from the King James. I believe it's the superior translation. But you've got to see the difference between the superstition and the prophetic word that vindicates itself. And stand with the truth of the doctrine of Christ, even if it means your translation is wrong in a point. You've got to know what the Greek word says. Say, no, I don't. Okay, you don't have to know what the Greek word says, but don't come at me with all this math then. You say I have to know all this math in order to believe you, that the King James is doubly inspired, but I can show you the same kind of math with the Westcott Hort. Okay, it's there. And yeah, I do believe there's something supernatural to it, but it doesn't mean that the King James has the endorsement or that the Westcott Hort does either. If you say that the King James does because of the math, then you have to say that the Westcott Hort does because of the math. God doesn't point us to math. The whole universe has his math in it. There's fractal patterns everywhere. There's all kinds of math going on. Pi and that show the design of the universe we live in. God just breathes out math. It's all over the place. And yes, he designed it all. But it doesn't mean a special endorsement. When you say that math means a special endorsement, you're now into the realm of witchcraft and divination. And you need to look into what Kabbalah is and all that stuff. I'm not going to get into it here. This is why a lot of Christians fell for Jonathan Cahn. He had all kinds of math that proved his prophetic crap, but it was all based on Kabbalah mysteries, Jewish mysticism, a fascination with numerical coincidences. I'm not saying that the coincidences are coincidental or that there's not a reality to it, because we live in a universe that was created by God. But when you assign special meaning to the numbers in a superstitious way, that blinds you to being able to have a reasonable discussion, and you're not pointing people to the doctrine of Christ, but to your math to prove something's real, you're totally in the wrong realm. You're in the realm of the senses and the mysticism. And I won't let that stuff abide on my wall. I swear this week has been just an absolute nonstop from every direction. The Calvinists, the King James only, well, I guess because of the free gracers, but it's just ridiculous, man. I need a break. All right, take care.